12th message from the book of Daniel. 12 messages. As we looked at the book of Daniel, we've seen that these first 6 chapters that we've been through are historical. They're concerned with Daniel and his personal friends, but the next 6 chapters, the remaining chapters in Daniel, are concerning Daniel and his people's future. Not his personal friends, but his people's future. These are prophetical in character, and they can be summarized really in 3 ways. There are 3 sets of pairs in the last 6 chapters. There's the 2 coming dictators that we see in chapter 7 and chapter 8. There are 2 critical delays that we see in chapters 9 and 10. And then in chapter 11 and 12, we see 2 complete disclosures. So today, we begin to look at these dictators. We're going to look, first of all, the first one is the coming Antichrist. These 2 coming dictators are each described in the opening verses as a little horn. Although the little horn in chapter 7 is different from the one in chapter 8, the one in chapter 7 is indeed the Antichrist. The one that's described in chapter 8 is Antiochus. And Antiochus, first of all, the Antichrist is associated with the final stage of the Roman Empire. And then Antiochus is associated with the final stage of the Greek Empire. Antiochus has already come and gone. He's been here. And so now we can study about him in light of history. But the Antichrist hasn't come yet. He may very well be on earth as we speak, but we are confined to prophecy in looking for information about him. So as we begin this morning, I want us first of all look at the introduction to the vision that Daniel has. And we see first of all when he dreamed it. In verse 1, we see that in the first year of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions in his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dreams, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And the 4 beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. So imagine Daniel's dream came between chapter 4 and chapter 5, which we already studied. It deals with chapter 4, the humbling of Nebuchadnezzar when he came to faith in the Lord. And then chapter 5 deals with the overthrow of Belshazzar when Darius comes on the scene. You remember when we talked about that overthrow, Daniel was content. He had contempt for Belshazzar offering him to all of these different things, these gifts and promotions, and he had a contempt for that. And he was asked to read the handwriting on the wall, and when he did, he was just offered all these gifts and everything. But he knew for some time that the Babylonian Empire was going to be replaced by the Medes and the Persians. So he knew that they didn't really have anything to bestow on him. He knew the end of the story. Now, by the first year of Belshazzar, the glory of Babylon, remember, it was a world empire. It was an amazing place, but it had already began to fade. There were powerful forces in the world, the Babylonians, but when it came to being at home, they were weak rulers in Babylon. And from the time of Nebuchadnezzar's death until the time that Cyrus came, the Persian, Daniel, this aging prophet, seems to have lived a life of retirement. He's then catapulted back onto the center stage with Cyrus. But Belshazzar really didn't know him as we studied through that. And for Daniel, those years were were years of rest. They were years of studying and meditating and time spent in prayer. So that's when he dreamed, between chapter 4 and chapter 5, in the first year of Belshazzar. Now, what did he dream about? What Daniel dreamed? Well, first of all, we see that he saw these stirring winds. You know, as Daniel had this dream, he had to bring back memories of when he was brought before Nebuchadnezzar to interpret his dream. Nebuchadnezzar's dream was of this great image. Remember, it had gold and silver and bronze and iron, made of these four metals, if you will. And Daniel has a dream, but it's of four great beasts. And the dream of the great image and the dream of the four great beasts have a lot in common. And that's what we want to look at right now. But they both had to do with the Gentile world power down through the ages. The chief difference in the two dreams was one of perspective. Nebuchadnezzar envisioned that it was a wonderful thing, it was a good thing, it was something glorious, something to be put on a pedestal and worshipped. And that's what caused him to build that statue that was 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. But Nebuchadnezzar saw the Gentile world, the Gentile empire, if you will, as this vast human image. And it had substance, it had strength, it had scenarios that would take place around it. But the symbol was one complete whole. It was one whole. But Daniel saw it differently. And he saw the differences between the four empires. He saw their true characters as they would be seen through the eyes of God, because God is giving him this interpretation. And Nebuchadnezzar, who, by the way, was the first world emperor, mostly saw things that concerned the beginning of Gentile world power. Daniel saw all these four empires, but was most impressed with the final one, the final features of Gentile world power. When a Gentile world power is all going to come to a head, and it's going to happen through the person of the Antichrist. And he saw the essential differences between the empires. The beasts were different from each other, and although the empires succeeded one after another in history, Daniel saw them all at once, just the way God would. God doesn't see them in the passing of time. So the first thing is that we see that Daniel saw them in striving winds, and that's what we see in verse 2. And talks about these winds. Now, it's important to understand that the geographic location is important. It's significant. In the case of Nebuchadnezzar's vision, it was Babylon. It was Babylon that was important, and Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. And at that point in time, in Nebuchadnezzar's vision, it began what is called the time of the Gentiles. You and I live in the time of the Gentiles. It's significant. Luke chapter 21 talks about the times of the Gentiles. It's destined to last, and it's only destined to last until the reign of Antichrist comes to an end when the Lord returns. The Lord's center, and where Daniel focused, was Jerusalem. Babylon's going to be gone, and God's original purpose for the Jews in Jerusalem is going to be fulfilled. So he saw these striving winds, but also in verse 2 it talks about these stormy waves that take place. This significant geographical location of Daniel's vision is the Great Sea. Whenever you see the Great Sea talked about in the Bible, it's always talking about the Mediterranean, the Great Sea. All the world empires in the Bible eventually, if not initially, held territory on the coastline of the Mediterranean Sea. So it's significant. The Euphrates River was the boundary of the Promised Land on the east. The Mediterranean was on the west. Babylon was about 500 or 600 miles away from the Mediterranean. Persia was even further away, but both of them came to the shores of the Mediterranean. And Persia came and fought against Greece. But it's significant, really, to note that by the time Rome comes along, by the time they come into power, Palestine was the geographic center of prophetic earth at that time. Do you know that all points of the compass in the Bible are always given in Scripture with relation to Palestine? Palestine was the center. And so this expression, when we see this Great Sea expression, it gives us a sphere of interest in Daniel's vision. But on the other hand, the four winds that he's going to talk about symbolize these four great angel princes that we read about in chapter 7 and chapter 9 in Revelation. Now, I know this is a lot. I'm it's like a water cannon. I'm just giving you a lot of information. Hopefully, you're going to pick up some of it. We're going to get to the real good part in a minute. But these four angel princes that it talks about in Revelation chapter 7 and chapter 9, that Daniel is talking about here, is what we read in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12, where it says that, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, the rulers of darkness of this age, and spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places." So you can see the synergism. You can see how it all connects, whether it's Daniel, whether it's Luke, whether it's Revelation, whether it's Nebuchadnezzar's vision or Daniel's vision. It's all connected. So Daniel sees this vision, and that's the introduction to it. But now let's look at the information that the vision holds. In his dream of these world empires, Daniel saw 5 empires. He saw, first of all, 3 similar empires. He saw a subsequent empire, and he saw a supernatural empire. Look at verse 4. He says, the first empire, the first was like a lion. It had eagle's wings, and I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. The first empire that he saw was the one that was in power when he dreamed the dream. He saw the Babylonian Empire. This first beast that comes up from the stormy sea, and when it uses that term, stormy sea, it's talking about warring nations. Each one of these 4 empires rode into power on waves, a tidal wave of war. And Nebuchadnezzar's reign began with a career, if you will, of rapid conquests in war. The original founder of Babylon was Nimrod. Nimrod, by the way, is an Old Testament picture of the Antichrist. He also founded the Assyrian monarchy that we see in Genesis chapter 10. But Nebuchadnezzar's conquests are depicted in the symbol of these eagle wings that we see in this verse. He conquered all of Syria. He conquered Palestine. He conquered Egypt. And he took ancient Tyre as well. But his conquests came to an end. The eagle's wings were plucked. So in verse 5 then we see there's a change in the vision. And he says, "And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, 'Arise, devour much flesh.'" So the second empire didn't have the speed of the first one. Although a bear can move fairly fast, it never could move as fast as a lion. A bear achieves its objectives through brute force, strength. It's powerful. And so these three ribs that are in the bear's mouth is describing the three initial conquests of the Medes and the Persians, and that's Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. Now, I like this part. History tells us that when Darius marched through Scythia, he mobilized nearly 750,000 men, and that doesn't count the 600 ships he had. When Xerxes marched against Greece, he took 2.5 million soldiers with them. I mean, it looked more like a migration than an army. These were not small wars that we're talking about, folks. See, what happens when a dictator would take a country and win a battle, they would take all the healthy young men and add them to their armies. So 2.5 million people is a sign of the victory. But now look at verse 6. After this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Once again, we see that this scene changes, and the leopard, with its grace and its beauty, is depicting the Grecian Empire. Remember that gold is Babylon, the silver is the Medes and the Persians, the brass or the bronze is the Grecian Empire, and the iron is Rome. Greece was known for its spirit. It was known for its speed and ferociousness. It's really a fitting symbol and a fitting symbol of Alexander the Great and the entire Greek Empire. Alexander had 4 generals, this is depicting these 4 wings. He had 4 generals, and he divided his kingdom up to those 4 generals. So these divisions we're going to look at further in the book of Daniel. I hope to be a little bit more concise with it. In chapter 8 and chapter 11, we see it more. But now, that's the 3 empires. Let's look at the subsequent empire that shows up here in verse 7 and 8. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Sound familiar? I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up from among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and mouth speaking pompous words. We see this empire is quite different from the other 3. The Roman Empire, it was the strongest, by far the strongest. It was the most powerful in all prophetic empires. And it was the most powerful in Nebuchadnezzar's dream as well. It's symbolized by those legs of iron. Iron depicts great strength. Iron's stronger than gold, silver, and brass, bronze. And so these Romans come into power, and that power lasted, listen to this, 500 years longer than all the other empires put together. 500 years. The same idea of iron strength from Nebuchadnezzar's vision is evident here in Daniel's vision. This monster, it says, had iron teeth. It had power to rend and tear. And then we see these 10 horns. They correspond to the 10 toes in Nebuchadnezzar's vision. They, in Nebuchadnezzar's vision, like Daniel's vision, identify with the beast in John and his vision in Revelation. In both cases, these ones that we're looking at here, they point to the same thing. They point to the end-time reappearance of the Roman Empire in a new form. Are you picking up what I'm putting down this morning? Is it making any sense to you? I hope so. I hope you haven't zoned me out yet. But now, in verse 8, we see the emergence of this little horn. That little horn uproots 3 of its competitors. But even stranger was the fact that this little horn had eyes and a mouth And Daniel's fascinated. He was mystified by it, but he didn't have time to ponder its significance because the vision moved on. And then in verse 9 it says, there's a supernatural empire that's brought into light. And it says, I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days that we just sang about was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. What does that sound like? Maybe Revelation? When John saw that vision in chapter 1? I love this. I love this. I mean, if this doesn't get you fired up, your wood's wet. His throne, it said, no, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before. That's a lot of people. What that is a number that can't be counted. That's exactly what it's explaining. And the court was seated and the books were open. So what we see here corresponds with Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5. In Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5, we see no less 17 references to the throne. And there's also references made to the seats, which are the thrones of the elders, the 4 and 20 elders. But these elders are celestial beings. But I want to go back to the fact that this is pointing out to this multitude of people before the throne of God. This is the rapture. That's exactly what it's talking about. And the rapture takes place before tribulation, okay? So understand, if you know Jesus, when that happens, you're going to be in that throng of people. Let me just say this to Pete and Candace and Chris and I were talking last night. And I said, there's no sign of the rapture. There's no sign that we're going to know. The Bible says it's imminent. It's going to happen. And you can't have a sign if it's imminent. But there's all kinds of signs about the tribulation. But what we see here taking place is that the church has been raptured and they're before the throne. So these 4 and 20 elders that it speaks about in Revelation are 4 and 20 are celestial beings, and they're there. They're given a job. They're there to witness God's judgment. God's judgment. And now we're before the throne, the white throne, the great white throne judgment. And he's got this jury of angelic beings, and their function is to observe the judgment. And Daniel sees these thrones, and they're being set in preparation for the judgment of the fourth beast. The fourth beast, the one with the little horn. And in the very center of the throne, Daniel sees the Ancient of Days. He sees the Everlasting One. And it says that his garment proclaimed his holiness. That's what the white speaks of. His hair, like pure wool, is talking about his eternal being, his countless years, his majesty, his might. His throne was like a wheeled chariot bathed in fire, and it reminds us that our God is a consuming fire. The countless host around the throne. Can you imagine? You will be hanging on every word that comes out of his mouth. Every single word. And then there's an even greater multitude that stands before him. And I can just see it just adoring, in wonder, in awe, because it's here that the sin question is settled. That's where it takes place. It's evident that the coming judgment of this fourth empire has a global effect, a galactic effect, a galactic interest. Its interest goes over to the entire universe. God's judgment, folks, is not arbitrary. Do you know that records are kept, and in the great white throne judgment, out they come? Not because he needs them, but because Those who face that final judgment will be face to face with the record of their own actions and words. I don't know about you, but I'm so glad that my Bible teaches me I can be standing in that throng, worshiping and in wonder. Now look at verse 11. I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. The first thing we see here is just the thrill of seeing the Ancient of Days. And we see the doom that the fourth beast is going to deal with. That doom is described, and the language both embraces the empire and the individual itself, the beast itself, its head. And its head is the Antichrist. The blasphemies of the Antichrist are going to bring the wrath of God. The Antichrist, together with the false prophet, is going to be cast into the lake of fire. Now, let me take you on a little journey. In 1957, the Treaty of Rome was established, and there were half a dozen European nations that began a new chapter in history. And they were France, Belgium, West Germany, Luxembourg, Italy, and the Netherlands. And they pledged themselves to this union. That EEC then became the European Common Market. About 12 years after this, in 1969, there were 3 more members added to that group, and it was Great Britain, Denmark, and Ireland. And they established that common agricultural policy. They established common custom tariffs, believe it or not. They're not new, folks. I'm just saying, these things are not new at all. But they all agreed on a common element of management. And then in January 1981, the 10th one was added, and that was Greece. And I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, Greece went bankrupt, literally bankrupt, for about a minute and a half because they were bolstered. They were what do you call that word? I'm looking up. They were propped up by all those other European countries. And in 1979, this European group, this monetary European group came out with this monetary system. And that monetary system is to bind all of those common market currencies of those 10 nations. And it was to protect the European common market from the fluctuation in the US dollar, the Japanese yen, and so on. And that's where the euro started. So Daniel's end time prophecies have come fully into focus with a 10-nation European Union, the little horn being the Antichrist, and it's going to be a person insignificant to begin with, but he's going to rise to rapid power. He's going to rise, and he's the subject of all kinds of other prophecies, not only in Daniel, but in 2 Thessalonians, in Revelation. And once he's in control, when he has control of that European Federation, then this revived Roman Empire will have the Antichrist to steer it towards total world domination. Now, again, I want to remind you, believers, we are at the throne room of heaven when all of this takes place. That's the rapture. When tribulation begins, we've been raptured. We're worshiping. So we see the introduction to the vision, the information of the vision, now the interpretation of the vision. We see that, Daniel is perplexed. He's confused. Some of it is in line with what Nebuchadnezzar dreamed, but there's a whole lot more going on. There's some new things going on, and it's got new moving parts to it, and it disturbs him. Now look at verse 15. It says, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to one of those, that's one of the angels, that's a celestial being. I came near to one of those who stood by, and I asked him the truth of all of this, so he told me, and he made known to me the interpretation of these things. These are those great beasts which are four kings which arise up out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. You see, Daniel knew that with the downfall of Jerusalem, the times of the Gentiles had begun. The Jewish world empire would now have to wait. It has to wait. The Jews had failed. The theocracy and monarchy had failed, and it ended up in apostasy and literally a disaster. He himself had been in exile in Babylon, and he'd been there for many, many years. And maybe at one time, when in those 70 years of captivity, maybe when they were over, there would be a restoration of the monarchy, he's thinking. Maybe that's going to happen. But as assured as he was by this angel giving him the interpretation of this vision, it's the end part that he's assured of, that the Messiah's kingdom is going to come and it's going to last forever and ever and ever. At the same time, he's disturbed. He's disturbed. And what was it that disturbed him? Even more than the time element, what disturbed him was this wild beast character of the coming kingdom and what it would mean for a world in general and for God's people in particular. The Babylonian Empire really hadn't been too much of a problem for Daniel. The Lord had seen to that. The Lord had looked after him. But the symbolism of this coming beast's empire, this fourth one, caused Daniel to tremble. No wonder he was grieved in the spirit. No wonder he was plagued and troubled by all of these thoughts. And we see in verse 16 that Daniel didn't have a problem in approaching this celestial being. He didn't have a problem in confessing his human inability to interpret the dream. He didn't have a problem with that at all. He had a desire to know, and that desire far outweighed any false modesty he would have had, any reluctance that he would have had to admit that he didn't understand. Evidently, when it says that he stood by, the celestial being stood by, that tells me he stood by to answer Daniel's questions, because Daniel had questions. There would be 4 passing kingdoms of men, and then a permanent kingdom of the Messiah. It's interesting, that's the Messiah coming back for the 1,000-year millennium. Interesting that this angel, this celestial being, seems to presume that Daniel would have interest in the last part of this statement where it says, the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and even forever and ever. He didn't seem to show any interest in the rise and fall of the human empires. Didn't shake him up too bad. He saw the wonders of that great white throne judgment. He saw the splendor of the Ancient of Days in heaven. He realized he was there. But the might and the majesty of a holy God spoke to him. Why should he be concerned about these four beasts? I mean, they're really only 4 kings or 4 nations, but all eclipsed the fact that once the saints of the Most High God took over, that kingdom would never end forever and ever. Now, I want you to look at that word, the Most High God. That's the word Elyon. God has a number of names. That's the word Elyon. It's talking about the possessor. It says possesses. Elyon, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom. You see, Elyon, this Most High God, is not only creator, he possesses, he owns it. It's Elyon who divides the nations their inheritance. You and I have an inheritance come through the Lord Jesus Christ when you know him. And when the empire, that is the fourth empire, begins to take shape again, and I believe it has, it's going to be a form of a confederacy, a union of 10 kings or 10 heads of state. And we see the shadow of that taking place today as we sit here. That is happening in our world today. But these 10 kings are still kings. And kings want to hang on to their sovereignty. They want to hang on to whatever measure of sovereignty they can hold on to. That is the inherent, listen to me, that is the inherent weakness of the common market countries today. You see, that inherent weakness is that they can't bring themselves to take the first step to surrender all individual sovereignty. You know, they can't accept total federation and become as one. Like, for instance, the United States. Not the Antichrist is up and he's moving, but they're not going to do that until he's revealed. The little horn is revealed. And we can see how that person deals with the divisions that he has with those 10 countries. We see it in the 3 that he's gotten rid of, that he's ousted. You know, these 3 in particular had to have been uncooperative with what he was trying to purport and push. But we aren't really told what countries they are. But the Antichrist, rising from obscurity to a position of authority in the European community. And he can see clearly that Europe no longer can afford the luxury that you know, of having this collection of rival competing countries. They can't do that. They've got to come together as one. So he's going to act swiftly and decisively. And that little horn, the Antichrist, is then going to assume control. From that point on, they and the other kings will take their orders from him, because he will put in his place, in his stead, in those 3 countries, his leadership. And I just think about that, and I believe it's at this point that he looks across the Atlantic, the Western Hemisphere. You know, the Western Hemisphere in so many ways is an extension of the European world. Its territories are occupied by those that came from Europe. In South America, it's Spanish. The language is spoken is Spanish. And possibly the Antichrist is going to use economic power to force cooperation. Maybe North Americans, you know, are going to quickly see the advantages of that. I don't know. The advantages of a true, powerful Atlantic alliance, even if it does mean surrendering certain aspects of sovereignty. Do you know that European bankers already have significant, considerable voice in our affairs? And maybe when he assumes control, the Antichrist will pull an economic rug out from under us. I can see that happening. Look at the world we live in. And he's going to say, join now or else. Let me say, there's a whole lot more going on in our world than you and I think we know. Certainly more than we know or think we know. Elyon is in control. That's what we have to realize. Now look at Daniel's personal reaction to all of this. Oh, I didn't talk about this. Next Sunday night, I'm going to talk about the One World Church. It's already happened. It was opened in 2023. It's in Dubai. And it's comprised of 3 buildings. One is a Jewish synagogue. One is a Islam mosque. One is a Roman Catholic Church. It was brought together by the previous Pope and leaders in those 3 religions. And it opened in 2023. Interesting thing about it is that you can't go there without a pre-approved appointment. Isn't that funny? I found it funny. But it's already in place. It's here. It's here. That's how close we are. But now let me tell you what Daniel's personal reaction to all of this is. In verse 28 it says, "This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly troubled me and my countenance changed, but I kept the matter in my heart." Here's this angel interpreting his vision, and now he's finished. And he had been encouraging. He really did. He was encouraging using the final outcome. Daniel was comforted, but not by the angel. You know, an angel might be able to answer the questions, but they can't bring that comfort that the one who we serve, the one who we worship can. They could never administer human comfort. For that, there's only one place that it can come from. And Daniel needed, as each one of us do, he needed that one that could touch his feelings, touch his infirmities, one who feels what we feel. And we can just see this celestial being looking really with astonishment at Daniel. And, you know, he sees Daniel's face and it's troubled. He's perplexed. He's baffled by these angelic words. And it's showing on his face. But the angel's going to rejoice at the long-term outcome. But the reason he could rejoice is that it was not his loved ones who were going to face the stormy seas and the winds that were down on their way. For that, he couldn't comfort Daniel. He had no comfort for Daniel. His interest in this entire thing was academic. His focus was the outcome. But Daniel was deeply upset because such terrible tribulation laid in store for his people. Terrible. He couldn't just shrug it off and forget about it. You know, we leave Daniel there for now, but we don't leave our thoughts there, because Daniel, being moved to the very depths of his being by this prophecy, by the scenes that he had just been shown, brings us to where we are in this very moment. And you know, we can get lost in the study of prophecy with this, that, and the other thing. We really can, by the aspects of the prophetic truth. But as saints, you know, we have to have souls that hurt, souls that really hurt, have pain for our loved ones. You know, we have to have our hearts moved, our hearts broken before God, just like Jesus weeping over Jerusalem. He cannot divorce his feelings, Daniel. He can't separate his feelings from the fact there's still troubles to come. Daniel couldn't, neither can we. And that's why we have things like this showing up in Romans chapter 10 and verse 14. How then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? Can I tell you that that word preacher right there is not me? It's all of us. That's our job. We are not only to come and to worship and to praise, we're to go. We're sent to share. So as we come to the emblems, Kathy's going to come and we're going to stand, we're going to sing our closing song, then we're going to sit down and we're going to take the emblems and we're going to pass them out, and we wait until everything has been passed out, and then we'll eat together and we'll drink together. But I want you to think about that. Think about that fact that one day he's coming back. And it's one thing for you to be prepared and ready to go. What about those loved ones? Those ones who are going to spend eternity without him. Eternity in that consuming fire. So on that note, let's begin. Let's get you standing up and we'll start to sing.